We're live.
Welcome to the Bridge webinar series. This is a production of the Masters of Educational Technology program at Michigan State University, and it's aimed at providing free, high-quality professional development that's focused on practice to our learning community. I'm Michelle Hagerman. I teach in the program and manage the graduate certificate programs in educational technology and online teaching and learning here at MSU. I'll be hosting our conversation today with my colleague Rohit Mehta, who's a doctoral student in educational psychology and educational technology. Rohit will also manage the back channel and bring questions to our live conversation as they come up. For folks watching us live, you can contribute to the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag MAET Bridge, all one word, MAET BRIDGE. We also have an embedded Etherpad at bridge.educ.msu.edu where you can type in questions or add resources that you think could be helpful to others. Today's topic is one of great interest to the MAET community. Many of our students tell us that they want to become technology integration specialists or technology directors long-term, and so we've decided to bring together a panel of tech integration professionals to share insights from the field. We are so pleased to welcome, for her second appearance here on the Bridge, Candace Marcotte, Sean Nash, Chris Fano, and Ben Rhymes. Thank you all for joining us. Let's start by having each of you introduce yourselves by telling us a little bit about where you work and the kind of work that you do there. Candace, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Candace Marcotte. I'm an instructional technology facilitator in Glenview, Illinois, which is a north suburb of Chicago. And here in my role, I work as a team of 8 technology facilitators in our district, and we each work in a building. So I am assigned a middle school building, so I work with about 900 students and about 75 teachers every day, working on integrating technology. We're also K through 8. One-to-one iPad, which means that every student has an iPad. So that's been a big push for my job, is working with the teachers to make sure that their instructional design takes advantage of the resource, but also knows to balance the resource.
Thank you, Candace. Sean, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. My name is Sean Nash, and I am in North Kansas City School District. Formerly, in another district nearby, I was the district instructional technology specialist for a district of about 11,000 students. And I've transitioned to a role in another district where I'm actually just an instruction coordinator, and I'm on a team of 6. At central office. District's about twice the size. There are about 20,000 students here in North Kansas City. And my team of 6 is basically curriculum, instruction, assessment, and really on many levels we are content generic and K-12. And so I suppose I've always enjoyed gray areas in the field of education, and this is definitely one of those. So even though not specifically an instructional technology person per se, because we have those folks here, really transitioned to a role of more of how do those skills play in a mature ecosystem where our high schools have been one-to-one for about 7 years. So making sure that those skills and processes are baked in throughout the system.
Thank you. Ben, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Ben Rhymes, and I am the K-12 Instructional Technology Coordinator for Mattawan Schools, and I guess you could say we're a small school compared to your school districts. We only have about 3,800 students, and if you talk about, an instructional team in regards to technology, that would be me. That's it. I'm a team of 1. So I do a little bit of what Candace does, where I'm working directly with teachers and students. I do a little bit of what Sean does, trying to craft some vision and some implementation, and then kind of picking up the pieces where I can. I also facilitate a monthly technology advisory group meeting where we bring in educators and administrators from all of our buildings once a month, and we share what's working with technology, any issues, and then try to move forward on our vision.
Fantastic. Thank you. Chris.
Well, good afternoon. I'm the Director of Technology and Assessment for a school district in Arlington Heights, Illinois. We've got a little bit over 5,200 students, and I have the great opportunity to, again, kind of cross over many different worlds that are fluid, and I get to work with our cabinet or our administration for planning and vision, but also get to work with our tech facilitators, our building support technicians to do the implementation and the practical day-to-day work that's so critical with kids. And so with the assessment component and obviously a lot of the changes in that area that involve technology, it's been an interesting development over the last couple of years as well with those commitments. But we still try to stay focused on, you know, instruction and professional development as the guides for what we're doing with tech here.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, what a great and diverse array of perspectives you all bring. And there's a lot of overlap, but I think there are some interesting differences. Because I know that our MAET community is really interested in understanding what it feels like on the ground let's start by just talking about a day in your life. What does a day in the life of Candace look like?
So for me, it starts with coming in before school and either collaborating with teachers or being here to help our students in our library, because my office is actually attached to our Learning Resource Center, which is AKA the library. So I am here to support students before school, but then in the school day, I usually have meetings scheduled so that I can collaborate with teachers. Sometimes I am co-teaching with teachers when they're trying something new, or being an extra set of hands when they're doing a large-scale project or lesson that really would be nice if they had an extra set of hands. And then in between, I am doing some like basic IT, so that we do have an awesome group of network engineers who supports our teachers, but we don't have them in every building, so we do have a help desk system that that teachers have to fill out. So sometimes if there's something that's easy to fix, I just go in and fix that if I can. And the day is consistently busy, I would say, which is nice because it goes by fast. And then after school, I'm here again helping students for an hour after school or so. But really, every day is different, but it's mixed in with those things. So collaborating with students, collaborating with teachers, and then doing some small-scale IT stuff.
Thanks, Candace. Sean, how about you?
As I mentioned earlier, I do work really closely with a team of 6. We share a really tight little office, and so it's a little bit like a dorm room in some respects. And honestly, in the Department of Professional Development and Curriculum, we support the professional learning of principals on down all the way to the kindergarten students. And so every single day looks different, very much so. And really, like I'd mentioned earlier, trying to be K-12 and trying to be content generic works most of the time. We are a workshop model district, which really helps in terms of some of those best case scenario uses of technology. I mean, that's the instructional model we're looking for. And so that sort of work, and there are things that you can learn from K-12 through that. That said, at the secondary level, once you hit 6th, 7th, 8th grade, somewhere in there, we do specialize a little bit. So of the 6 of us, I was a biology teacher for 20 years, and we've got somebody who sort of specializes in math and ELA and so on. So there are times when we're working independently, on content level PD or implementation of, assessments and things like that. But there are other times when we really are putting our heads together and just trying to figure out what's best for kids at any given point. So.
Thanks. Ben, you want to go next? What does a day in your life look like?
Sure, yeah. A typical day in my life, when I get in, I actually, my office is in the centralized technology department for our district, so I've got a little cubicle there, and I'll usually spend the first hour of the day, unless I'm doing something like Candace has, where I'm in a meeting in a particular building, or working with some students first thing in the morning at the middle school, high school level. I'll use that to sort of get ready for the day, as to what's coming up with any classroom visits that I'm going to be doing, working with students. I do a couple things where I gather stories from around the district, and try to tweet those out. So sometimes I'll do some walkthroughs of the buildings, just take some photos, get a good positive story going out there. And then once a week, I do a podcast trying to get my tech director's, not necessarily not his face out there, but at least his words, his thoughts, because we are centralized. We're kind of like the people that get we take the brunt of all the bad stuff. So I'm sort of like an ambassador, if you will, for the tech department. And then I split the rest of my day, either being in classrooms working on that, consulting with individual teachers and administrators, to then working with my assistant superintendent on putting together ideas for our school improvement plan, trying moving forward on our technology integration. It's a lot more administrative than it used to be. It used to be much more like Candace's day.
Thanks. Chris, what about you and your role as tech director?
Yeah, it's probably a step even more administrative than that right now. We do have a team that we work with that covers data analysis and networks, and also the instructional side. And it just to, I guess, reiterate what everyone's saying, it's just all about diversity. I mean, you have both horizontal and vertical needs that you're trying to fulfill, and so it could range from doing promotions and marketing 1 minute to trying to deal with, a cyberbullying issue, to then walking into a meeting about professional development and long-term planning. And so, I think that's something that's very much I appreciate about the job. And the only thing I guess I could really add to it, is I'm sure for all of the other members, is it's not an 8 to 4 job. I mean, with blogging, with updating wikis, with managing social media, with email and texting back and forth, there's a constant connection with all of the different people in the organization that not only do people expect that communication, but I also think they appreciate it. So you kind of have to deal with that side too.
Yeah, thanks for providing that really nice segue by sort of synthesizing some of the themes that I was hearing from each of you. I've kind of identified some main ideas. So there's the issues of professional development. There's the administrative side of things. Let's actually start by talking about professional development and the ways that you think about professional development, maybe some of the challenges that you face in providing professional development to your colleagues, or in strategizing professional developments for your colleagues. I guess a specific question could be sort of what models and strategies do you use that you found to be effective, and how do you implement them? Who'd like to start?
I can go ahead and start.
Go for it.
Okay, cool. I'll keep it simple. Couple examples. One on an individual basis. This is something I've been working on over the last couple of years. When I first started in the role, it was sort of like, I want to help you, so teacher approaches me and I say, great, and I'll put together, they tell me what they want to do. They want to blog with their students, or they want to work on a wiki or something. I'll put together a tiny little set of resources and then jump in there with them and say, okay, here you go, spend an hour or so with them working on it, and then offer to come back in when they feel comfortable and work with their students. But over the last couple of years, I've been transitioning that to something that is more, how'd you say, a little more sustained. So I'll do that first visit with the individual, either face-to-face or virtually, and figure out what do you need, what sort of learning experience do you want your students to have. And then from there, I'll go ahead and I'll put together maybe a Google Doc of resources and links, things that can help them out, determine what I need to do to get prepped. Do I have to create a blog for them or a wiki, or is that something they can do? And then I'll come in and I'll work with them and their students, and then I'll set up a follow-up meeting, either a week or 2 weeks down the road, where I come in. I actually had a follow-up meeting today with a 4th grade teacher that started blogging with her students last week. It was canceled because I have a snow day. But that's an opportunity for me to come in and then help out and provide any changes or modifications we need to make, because I recognize often that I would put something into practice, teachers would do it, and then I didn't have a lot of good follow-up. So that's something I've been working on lately, is putting together a sustained plan, so that way I'm working with a teacher for a few weeks to a point where they feel comfortable doing it, and then I can move on and revisit maybe a month later after that. So that's just on the individual level.
But I think that's a powerful model. We've done a lot with our tech facilitators in that regard of, you start off with providing the resources and maybe doing some modeling, and then you go to a co-teaching model, and then you can go to some independent practice with some support. And it is that building sustainability over time without just saying, here's a video, go figure it out. So we kind of look at it like a hand-holding model, like, hey, go and model. You can do the first lesson. You co-teach the second lesson, and then you could be there for support at the third, or you can let them go independently and build up that skill set for the teacher.
Yeah, and it really depends on where the teacher is and what their experience is with it previously, and of course what their goal is too. Quite often there is just a one and done, where if they just need something really quick, like I need to figure out how to write math equations using my software that I have. Okay, great, that can be a one and done, and they can do that. But something like the blogging definitely requires some co-teaching for a lot of teachers at the beginning.
And I think jumping off of that, for me, the most successful professional development has been anytime I can make it the most personalized, just like Ben, you were saying, because we've tried to do full staff PDs. We have to do like a district institute day where we talk about, whatever it is that the instructional coaches have put together. And like for me, there's a weird duality, because we have instructional coaches and then we have instructional technology facilitators. So sometimes like those worlds don't marry as well as you want them to in terms of vision. So it's kind of, you have to kind of keep that forefront of, we've really transitioned away from doing tutorial style PDs, and now it is about, okay, we're going to talk about assessment today. Well, under assessment, I can show you these technologies that would benefit you, or these strategies for dealing with assessment, but it's not come in and learn how to use the test feature of our learning management system, which I think has been really wonderful. And I think it was harder to sell at first than what now it is. And now it seems pretty like everybody's kind of buying into that vision. But we've done, anytime we can do a professional development to a larger group, we always find some way to differentiate and break down within that group. So there's that part of, yes, we're going to give you all the same message, but then that's going to be for a short period of time, and now we're going to break out into groups and explore things and create things at our level. And I think teachers really appreciate that. So when we do bigger groups, we always try to give differentiated pieces to it. And then when the most successful has been, though, me just scheduling times to meet with teams, and I just drop in and I touch base with them and let them know, like, if I have an idea for whatever they're talking about that day. And I feel like that's been the most beneficial, because people see me as an actual collaborative partner and not somebody that has like this pre-existing agenda to get them to do X, So I think that's been really nice for me, is having that one-on-one time, or one-on like 5 time with them.
Yep.
Yeah, I think any system has to have multiple levels of support, and I see what you guys are talking about right now is that just-in-time level, which is absolutely huge. It's responsive. It meets teacher needs at the time when it matters. Has all those characteristics that we know about good education in the classroom for students, and it works the same for teachers as well. At the same time, I think we also have to have that other level, which tends to look at the big picture, the systemic view, and says, what is the vision? Where is that vision going? And what are those frameworks we need to keep that vision in place? And so, when I think about some of that systemic PD that goes throughout the system, I think anytime you move away from just-in-time learning, I think you have to be careful that you're not just creating just-in-case situations. And so I think you have to be really careful to take, what are those frameworks that you're trying to build across the system? Is it the TPAC framework? Is that the root of where you're starting? Do you also, want teachers to understand the SAMR framework? Is that something that you bake into every time you sit with teachers? Are we looking at, how this affects our TPAC? Are we looking at where are we with regard to substitution, to modification, redefinition, so on? Whatever it is at that level, I think you have to bake that in, and then I think you have to sell situations like Candace is talking about. I think you have to prop those people up and say, hey, we've touched this, we've looked at this at a high level, and we have folks who are absolutely ready to be in your room with you and your students at your beck and call. So I think a lot of times those set up systemic opportunities for PD can really market what I see as some of the more really engaging PD that happens more one-on-one or one-to-small group.
And absolutely, to even push that idea in a different direction is that if you embrace something like TPAC, whatever that framework is, that it goes across departments and disciplines. I think for too long, obviously, there was an approach in the technology department and then in curriculum and instruction, and the interwoven nature of instruction with technology now, I think, demands that those conversations are happening across departments and disciplines. And yeah, if TPAC isn't a tech framework, if that is the model, it's the model that's embraced by curriculum, by your instructional facilitators, your tech facilitators, and I think that is where that power really happens from that broader, belief perspective.
Well, I think it's a great point because, we have assessment folks, we have instructional folks, we have curriculum folks, and at some level, the larger the district, you specialize so much, I think sometimes to the detriment of understanding TPAC. And I remember having conversations years ago with Punya about how we split that apart, and really it's something that is synthetic. It's not additive, right? It's all about how those things come together in an individual and in individuals. So I think you make great points about that.
Well, and I think what's interesting too is when you do utilize TPAC with your staff, then you notice, and they become more transparent in the fact that a lot of times when they come to you about a lesson idea or they're brainstorming, the main focus is never on the technology, it's always on the pedagogical strategy. And so it lets them see, like, oh wait, that's right, like, because you are digging into that pedagogical strategies and like ripping them apart to figure out what is the best way to deliver content to your students. Then you can come in with the piece of technology and look at what works. So I think for me, having TPAC at the ready, and we have educated our staff in it, has really allowed me to be able to push them harder and challenge them more in their practices than if I would have just been stuck in the T bubble, of TPAC. So I think that that's a really nice tool to have in your back pocket so that they understand where you're coming from as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you're thinking, Candace, about empowering. Right, all of you are talking about providing these higher sort of strategic frameworks to support instruction in your current environments, which empower professional decision making, right? Which empower people to be thoughtful and to discriminate and to think critically about what to use, when, and how. I wonder about the strategies that you've had. A couple of you actually raised this question, in our conversations beforehand. How do we get the people maybe who are feeling like technology isn't for them sort of into this use of technology in thoughtful ways? How do you do that? How do you support people in your systems who just, I don't know, worried about the control of their classroom, or I don't know, there are all kinds of reasons for why people might not feel comfortable. How do you address that issue?
Well, I'm actually pretty fortunate in my school district. There was actually something already in place that I kind of walked into. K through 5, we have teaching families. So we have 3 or 4 teachers that work together, and they have common plan time at every grade level. And so they have the ability to, every week, they can have a grade level meeting, they can have a content area meeting, they could even have a family meeting. And at our middle school level, we have teaching teams. So that means we've got a group of 4 content area teachers that work together and have common plan time. And then, of course, at the high school, we have department meetings. But I was really fortunate to walk into that, so that means they already had the ability, they had the time to collaborate with one another. At least once a week, they've got these family meetings. So it was really nice to be able to walk in there and to work directly with them and know that they had that support. So every year, at least at my the later elementary building, so we've got 3, 4, and 5th grade, and we just have 1 later elementary, which means we've got like 12 teachers at each grade level. So what I've done over the last few years is I'll work directly with 1 teaching family, and I'll meet with them every other week and just identify some technology skills or goals that they want to work on. And they just talk about that, because not all of them are at the same level, and that's okay. But then they can feed off of each other. They can support one another. So I'm not even going to claim, yay, I did anything. I walked into that. And so I tell anyone I can, if you can identify common plan time for your teachers at any level, and make sure that they've got time at least once a week, then that just makes your life so much easier, because they can support each other. You can get the ball rolling, and after a few meetings, it sort of runs itself, and they'll help each other out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm can just jump in because I'm interested in that, because we're trying to actually facilitate some of that online now. So that's been a big push to combine the professional development with that professional sharing world, especially in the area of technology, that so many teachers have wonderful solutions to their everyday needs that a district level may not see or appreciate. And any opportunity where we can get them online to share and show those ideas, we have found to be pretty powerful and bridge some of that time gap. So again, it's an area we're exploring, but it's just supporting what kind of Ben's saying is they have these tips and tricks that somebody else will just see and say, yeah, that's what I need. That's going to make this a little bit easier in my life. Sometimes is what is needed to get them a little bit more invested or interested to explore it more, again, as a peer or on their own as an individual.
I think, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, jumping on that, I think anytime you can allow teachers to share what they're doing is really powerful, because it's one thing if it comes from me, but I have technology in my role. Like, that is a part of my title. So, of course, if I tell you, like, oh, this is easy, I promise. But if you have another teacher telling another teacher, oh, man, wow, you should see what this did in my classroom when I introduced it this way. I feel like that is easier for some teachers who are more resistant to hear, because even though I was a classroom teacher, people automatically put me in that category of, oh yeah, but you know technology really well. Well, it's coming from a colleague in terms of you're in the trenches doing the same type of work. So I feel like it makes it easier to hear and find value sometimes in what they're saying, because it makes it less scary if somebody who you can relate to very easily can also tell you that that is a strategy that works. And I think too, like anytime I meet with staff, we don't ever call it a planning meeting. We don't ever use terminology like that. We always call it a creativity jam session, so that there is already like the guard is being brought down. We're just throwing ideas out and it's going to roll how it rolls. But that has led me to do some really cool things with teachers where they would have never embraced it before if we would have been like, this is our planning time and we're going to follow the norms and we're going to do all of this. Like sometimes it has to get really messy to get to a really awesome outcome.
Yeah, and I think when you've got technology in your job title like that, I think that's a huge opportunity to really just model what it looks like to be a complete educator. And by gosh, sometimes a fistful of markers and a pad of paper is the best app for that situation. Mm-hmm. And so, helping teachers work through that situation and modeling that and being super explicit, whether you're using an iPad app or whether you're using paper posted to the wall as a graffiti board. I mean, I think regardless, you have to be so explicit about here's why we did what we did. How would this have been different if we would have tweaked this approach pedagogically in some way? How would it have been different if we would have tweaked the technology? And really just getting folks to think about those situations all the time. I mean, I think I'm reminded a little bit too by Robin Fogarty works a lot with coaches, and I took away from her years ago that there are basically 4 things a coach can do. They can instruct, they can encourage, they can inspire, and they can empower. And so I think at every given moment, whether you're sitting at the table with one teacher or whether you're in a room with 50 teachers, I think you have to constantly be asking yourself, what is that I'm doing today? I mean, am I instructing? Because that's great. But, where in the system are we empowering, and where in the system are we inspiring as well? So I think when you have those really responsive systems where you've got professionals who can go sit and meet with teachers, that is absolutely awesome. And I think it has to be balanced with sort of keeping your eye on the future, keeping your eye down the road, and maybe having a speaker series in your district and bringing in folks that can challenge maybe your high flyers, the folks that aren't going to ask you to come in because they've got some of the technology stuff nailed. Who are the real voices that can inspire folks too? So I think if you're instructing and encouraging and inspiring and empowering, you're hitting people on all 4 levels.
Wow.
Sean, if I can just sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I have to piggyback on what both Candace and Sean were saying. If there are any principals or administrators watching this right now, just go ahead and mute it for like the next 30 seconds. Anything you can do to get the principals out of the room sometimes is really good for some of those reluctant types. Because what Candace was saying, I just when I meet with them, I just call it chat. We're just going to chat, see where it goes. And I have found that with those more reluctant teachers, sometimes making sure that, hey, this is a safe environment, kind of like what you were saying, Sean. Sometimes a safe environment for them isn't with the principal. Not that they don't have great relationships, but sometimes when the principal is there, oh, this is the person that's going to be observing me or evaluating me later. I want to put that best face forward. So sometimes having those safe places without administrators there really helps.
Unless the principal's actually modeling the approach that you'd like to see.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah.
Right, right, exactly. Which is kind of the question that I want to think a little bit about those people, because you're working vertically as well as you're working with a lot of stakeholders as a group, and so how do you include, empower, encourage the people who don't have technology in their job title to be a part of the strategies that you're trying to implement, to be a part of that vision, to be a part of the aims that you've set, for your district. Sean, maybe you could talk to that, and Chris also in particular.
For me, it goes back to something I read from Thomas Gusky that really opened my eyes a few years back, where he says that when we do PD, we're still doing it in many respects the way it used to be done, where we bring a bunch of folks into a room and we start off with the premise that we can change their beliefs. Mm-hmm. By changing their beliefs on any given area, they're going to go back, change their practice, and then thus affect student achievement. And really the flip side is the only way that it ever works. And the flip side is that, sure, you may bring folks into a room together, but the premise can't be about changing the beliefs of folks. It's got to be a focus on changing an action. Mm-hmm. And if you can, if you can inspire or require some small change in action, I've never met an educator who has taken an action that positively affected student achievement that did not change their beliefs. And that's self-owned. And so I think keeping that in mind and really never trying to bring folks into the room and change the way they believe about things, but making absolutely sure there's a situation where they can take a safe risk and change some bit of their action, only that is going to help folks form and shape their beliefs. And so, every time you bring folks together, I think there have to be opportunities for that. I think, when we do modules for professional development across the workshop model, and when we roll those out across, across all of our buildings in the district, we bring the principals in, we bring the instructional coaches in, and we talk about what this looks like. We want to move in a certain way in student and teacher conferring. And so when we model that work, that has got to include best case situations. Where does technology play into that? And so that's just got to be a part of it. And so that's starting at the top level, and it's a little bit of a pyramid scheme when you look at it that way, but if it doesn't happen that way, when it goes back to the buildings, those models have to be there, I think.
Yeah. Chris, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think you have to have a long-term perspective of trying to be able to provide information to people so that they're asking the same kind of questions, again, across disciplines or across departments. And whether it's, what is the purpose that we're implementing this particular project, or what need does this serve, or instructionally, how does this enhance an experience for a kid, are those core questions, not necessarily, do we need an interactive whiteboard, for example. And so actually recently a very good success story about this, we talk a lot about the same thing. Is this augmenting? Is this substituting? What skills do teachers need? We were doing a review of a science curriculum, and they came in and they showed all the fancy online versions and what kids would be able to do. And somebody in our instruction department, after the whole, dog and pony show, pretty much said, well, so if I was doing this in a notebook, like the student notebook, is it any different than what they're doing online? And for the company to come back and they're like, well, not really. They're like, then why? Then we don't need it in this instant. It's not meeting an instructional need. It's not meeting an experiential need for our students. And so when you hear those conversations about application, about need, about what skill sets would a teacher need to implement it, those are the underpinnings of a SAM or a TPAC model, clearly by definition, but definitely by thought process. Mm-hmm. And so I think that long-term perspective of informing them, having them ask questions, is really an important side for administrators and curriculum designers.
Yeah. Okay, so you brought up tools a little bit there, and I would, because you all work in different, have different kinds of implementations in terms of the tools that your students use in your district. I'd like to just take a minute to talk about the way that you see sort of the interactions of different deployment scenarios of technologies with the learning outcomes. And then sort of a tertiary kind of connector to that is, how do you assess all of that? So it's kind of a big question, but maybe each of you could start by saying, okay, we have one-to-one laptops, or we have Chromebooks or whatever, or we have a variety of things. I just like to sort of spend some time exploring how the technology interacts with some of the implementation issues you see, and then after all of that, how do you know it's working? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sean, do you want to start?
Yeah, so in my current district, we are one-to-one across 4 high schools. All 4 high schools, about 1,500 students. And I believe this is about the 7th year. And so they're MacBook Air implementation. We also have, well, actually what was recently been named an Apple Distinguished Program at the middle level. We've got a program called the Vanguard program. And so our instructional technology specialists or coordinators, they are running, that's really a professional development model, but it's kind of a cohort model. So teachers across the board have said, yeah, I want to sign on, I want to be a part of this. And so their professional development is really intense. And so that's sort of paving the way for our future implementations, because we certainly know we've got to increase our access and things like that down at lower levels. My previous district was at the middle level, it was an iPad one-to-one implementation, full one-to-one. And then in our 8 title elementary schools, it was one-to-one iPads from grade 3 through 6 as well. And so, one of the things that, regardless of, obviously the things that you do with those kids at the ground level with a MacBook Air are slightly different technologically from the things that you would do with an iPad. But in terms of, rolling this out and supporting it, how much preparation do you do prior to the kids getting laptops? How much preparation do you do along the way? I think those things are similar, regardless of whether it's a Chromebook or an iPad or whatever. I don't think there's a right way to do it. I think the wrong way to do it would be to think that you're ever there, that you've ever arrived. I mean, I think you have to think of, in terms of access for kids. You hear a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, we want to go to one-to-one because we want to level the playing field of access for kids, and poverty is an issue, and I'm all behind that. But access is the easiest problem to fix, and it's fixed on day one of a rollout.
Yeah.
You've got the iPad, you've
Great
got
point.
the laptop, whatever it is, you're finished. So what is it that you're looking for?
Yeah, that's not really access, is it? I mean, we know that's having a tool in your hand. That's not access.
Yeah, true.
Right.
So, yeah. And so, again, I think you just have to really think longitudinally about how are we continuing to get better and continuing to get stronger. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually the biggest weakness I see most school districts right now in Michigan. Large number of there's been a statewide initiative for it's called the TRIG grant, Technology Readiness and Infrastructure Grant. So grant dollars going to districts to help them purchase devices to prepare for online testing. And in reality, yes, they're going to be using it for online testing, but they're excited to have those devices to use every day in the classroom. And a lot of districts are snatching up devices because they're saying we want to provide access to all of our students. And so when you go and you ask them, okay, well, what's your vision? Well, that's our vision. It's providing access. It's like that's not vision. That's like you said, boom, day one, boom, every student has access the day of rollout, right? So if that's your vision, boom, vision's done. So actually, the important thing that I tell people, and I work with each of my individual buildings, again, putting on my admin hat. I did this a number of years ago when we were looking at interactive surfaces, projector surfaces, so interactive whiteboards. And we sat down, we spent a whole day, and we identified what type of learning experiences do you want to have with your students, what type of interactive learning experiences, what type of collaborative. So we narrowed it down to that, something that's interactive, collaborative, that mimics that really good teaching where, the teacher's not necessarily at the front of the room all the time. Students are getting up, they're encouraged to go ahead and write on the board and share their thoughts. And we said, okay, let's start from there. Everyone can get on board with that. We like a classroom environment at the elementary level. This was just an elementary building where where we have that type of learning environment. And then we worked backwards from there. We looked at a bunch of different devices, which ones allow for multiple people up on the board, which ones allow for easy student and teacher creation of interactives, things like that. And we eventually came to a device. And it really didn't matter which device we went with, as long as we made sure it allowed our teachers and our students to have that. And so over the years, it's been very easy then to come back to that and say, as like everything else, things get old and they don't get they're not as exciting, and there's new shiny that's out there. Going back to it and say, well, what was our original vision? Well, we wanted to get our students up there and feel comfortable interacting and collaborating with the teacher just like they would in the classroom with whiteboards. So that really helped us. And then for evaluation, it was actually pretty easy. I actually did a couple of workshops that I do every year for our new teachers. I'll do a workshop coming up. This will be just after Thanksgiving. I've got 1 day-long workshop where it'll be introduction to those tools, to those interactive tools that surface and everything. And here's a few tools. Let's play with it. And then I'll do a follow-up workshop where I will bring them in, and I'll put the onus right on those teachers and say, what have you done? Show me. Show me the interactive notebooks or flip charts that you've created. What sort of experience have you created for your students? And if all they have to show me is what they created from the first workshop, that's it. I know immediately, okay, there's a classroom where I'm going to have to get into on a more regular basis. But if they show me, oh, this is what I was creating, and I went off in this direction, and I did this, okay, now I know I don't have to worry about that classroom as much anymore because they've got it.
Right.
Jump in right now.
Sorry, Rohit, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have a question on Twitter which connects kind of to what you're just talking about, and it evolves from what Sean said earlier, that the change in action brings change in beliefs. So we have a question from Josh Rosenberg, who's a doctoral student here. He's asking, in terms of working to change action, how do you understand or determine what teachers already know or of what they already do or are doing? How do you know that?
It's a great question. I mean, it's connected, I'm sure, to the ways and the metrics that you use for assessment, right? Which is
right.
Well, it's a great question. It's the ultimate teacher question, right? Why would you ever open your mouth in the classroom as an instructor until you find out exactly where kids are to begin with, right? And we know that's true, so it's an absolutely fantastic question in terms of even a larger system. How do you know what your teachers currently have? And I think all of us would agree that we have ways of, that we've come across, or we've made decisions about, what we need to be better at because we've been in classrooms from here and there. But in terms of a really systemic approach of where we are prior, that's a pretty inspiring question, actually. It inspires me to go back and think, wow, I think everybody could probably do better about that.
We, my first year here, I did give out like a survey as a formative assessment to kind of see where everybody was. And then year 2, I was like, oh, I feel like I'm still working on those things from year 1. And so I didn't give it. But then last year, what we did is, as a district, we did ask, because through our one-to-one deployment, we have really communicated with teachers and parents, and that's where our whole one-to-one stemmed from, is a committee of teachers, administrators, and parents. And so they made the recommendation for that. So we've always tried to keep those audiences really informed and let them know that they have a voice. And so we just gave a survey at the end of last year to gauge again in a broader scale of what everybody's experiences were with the one-to-one, but also instruction in general. So instead of it being tool-based, it was a lot more large-scale, assessment. How do you view assessment taking place in your classroom now? Do you feel like you could use more support? Do you feel like you're ready to take the next steps? And from that, we also asked them about PD and everything moving forward. So then we were able to develop an entirely online PD for them to complete over the summer if they chose to, or to like play around with things they had acknowledged that they needed growth in, but also things that we knew down the line, if we were going to think big, that we had to give them exposure to, which I feel like got a lot of teacher buy-in, but also that survey will be given every spring for the next 2 years so that we can evaluate what tools we're providing them with in terms of like instructional support, but also their own growth with each of those things.
Yeah, Chris?
I also think there's an underlying component of what information are you really trying to gather about those teachers, and I think, as been discussed, you have this idea of self-report. Okay, we can give surveys about how comfortable do you feel with this technology, what experience do you have with it, which obviously differs very much from if you want to set up a structure in which you're testing to see, hey, have teachers met a certain threshold or a standard? Whether it's I know there are instruments around TPAC, but also around like the ISTE standards, the ISTE teacher standards. And I have not heard of a lot of districts, and we don't do it here, that have gone that route that would build that into either part of an evaluation or some form of a summative feedback to them about saying, hey, we expect all teachers to be proficient in these standards, and we have some metric that's not just a self-report, but is some idea of a test or an assessment to do it. So I think it's an interesting question too that underlies all of that, which is what approach do you really want to take? Do you want to kind of find out where teachers are through observation and self-report, and then be able to adjust, professional development expectations accordingly, or do you go to a more systematic, analysis of what their standard, or their proficiency would be? I don't know if anybody else on this panel has gone that route with the proficiency side, but I know we certainly haven't embarked that route.
I actually had a principal do something interesting this year, because we've over the last few years we've looked at the ISTE standards and we've talked about that and how do we implement those for teacher evaluation, and it's one of those things where I'm not officially an administrator, I'm not evaluating them, so that's not my role, and a lot of the principals go, well, I'm not strong enough in this area, so I don't want to evaluate them on something that I'm not comfortable doing myself. So one of the principals in our district actually said, you know what, we're going to put an evaluation of the students' technological abilities on their report cards. We're going to go ahead and do that this year, and so that way parents will see how well their students are doing from a technological standpoint. Now, they have a technology teacher in that building, so they get it a little bit each week, but the idea is, well, maybe if we make it more transparent to parents, then you could look at it and say, well, maybe that's being a little coercive, or maybe it's just pushing a little bit, saying, look, your parents are going to be looking at this on your students' report cards. So if you're one of those teachers, it's kind of like, well, I don't know about technology. Maybe you can't say that anymore, because your parents are going to come back and go, hey, I noticed my students doing this. Well, what are you doing in your classroom to help your students on that area? So it's really interesting, and I'm really eager to see how that's going to work out by the end of this.
That's really interesting. I would also like to think that, if you really are looking at, you did mention the ISTE standards in that respect. So at that level too, there are the NETS-T standards, which you mentioned for teachers. But I think in that system, you also have to ask yourself, what are we doing regarding the NETS-A standards? Because there are standards for administrators as well. And what are you doing to model these types of contexts for students and for teachers, and what are those things that you're doing to help create and foster this ecosystem where all of these things that we're working on can take place. So I don't think it's fair to ask to look at a set of standards for one level if you're not systematically doing it for all.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Sean. So it sounds to me like there's a lot of interest and there's a need, right, among you, sort of move toward these more formalized ways of assessing the impact of your technology integration. Ben, something that you said really kind of reminded me, of course, in this role that you fulfill, in school districts, right, I'm assuming that there is sort of an accountability piece, right? That's kind of built into the work that you do. And Chris, you talked about like marketing earlier on. You talked about, you know, the ways that you have to also be, you know, thinking outwardly and thinking about how you're talking to the many stakeholders, you know, who are interested in the ways that funding has been used to support these technology integration issues. You know, how do you communicate sort of the effectiveness of your work to your stakeholders then?
Well, I'll just jump off. I know Ben was talking about, I think everyone's touched on this idea of
Mm-hmm.
what was your purpose and plan for the implementation.
Yeah.
And if that is not transparent and articulated or identified, I think then you scramble to put pieces together on the backside and justify why it was used, or try to hide it under, oh, well, we want to improve a math score or something like that. So I think that it has to have that rigorous conversation prior to implementation to say, what are we really doing with this stuff and what do we want to achieve? And that in some cases, like we've had conversations around here, there are people who say, well, I want to increase student engagement. Okay, for what end? What does that look like? How do you define it? And I think it's bringing some of the concept of good research, you know, in some regard,
Mm-hmm.
into that decision-making process. So how are you defining these terms? How are you going to look at it over time? What data are you collecting? And then be able to then accurately and honestly report back out on the progress towards them. And again, if that's your world, if student engagement or attendance or something is critically important or of value, then that could be fine. So I think that's one side of it. And just to real quick say, I think there's a need for more formalized evaluations and assessment, but I don't think they always have to be directly tied to things like student achievement. I think there's a lot of wonderful evaluation options like situated evaluation that you could see these you know, innovations emerge in use and in the classrooms that we want to pay attention to, and then say, hey, why did it turn out this way in this school or in this classroom, and how can we then help, you know, deliver that into other settings? So
Yes.
one of my goals is to not always break it down to you know, necessarily an academic standard or some numeric metric, but really get in there and see how are these things you know, developing over time, and how do we then help support that in different environments.
No, I think something Chris said was very interesting to me when he talked. I mean, when you stop and think, we're not held accountable for technology implementation the way we are for student test scores, in terms of, you know, from the state level or something like that. So I think it's a massive opportunity to do what Chris said about putting that back out and reporting back out for staff, because you can gain a lot of wins in a situation where here's what we're doing, here's what we're seeing, here's, you know, this is all in the vein of constant improvement professionally. And so it's an opportunity for huge transparency, I believe. And I think we have an opportunity that they could then parlay into, you know, reporting out some of the other things regarding curriculum and instruction and student achievement in other ways.
I think this conversation could go on for about 7 more hours, but I'm looking at my clock and it's almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon here. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut it off. I want to be respectful of all of your times and your schedules. I'd like to say thank you so much for these insights. This has been an absolutely terrific conversation. I would like to also say that the episode will be archived at bridge.educ.msu.edu. Our next episode of The Bridge will be on Tuesday, December 16th, which will be just after the MSU semester ends. And we've invited MAET faculty to join the conversation in an EdCamp style webinar that will focus on their most recent research findings. So you can watch the EduTech blog and at MAET on Twitter to get information on that closer to the date. As we close, however, I would love to ask each of our guests to just give us like 10 words, maybe, just a quick final word on what you love about the work that you do. Candace, you want start?
Sure. I would say that what I love about my job is that I get to play every day and inspire other people to take risks and play as well, and that in the end we see a lot of awesome stuff created.
Ben?
I'll echo being able to play and have a whole bunch of different challenges thrown at me every day, but also to empower people because as only one person in my district, I can only do so much. So when people come to me and say, "Oh, hey, you know, you should be doing this or you should be doing that or try this," I look at them and say, "Those are some great ideas. What can you do to step up and be a leader in your circles?"
Chris?
Yeah, I like creating systems that help support needs and connecting resources. I think there's something fascinating about trying to make things clean and efficient and targeted and from a system side. So that's why I am where I am now.
Sean, last word.
We have a ton of expertise in many different areas in our district, and what excites me most is being in a position right in the middle of all that to try to help make connections between the assessment folks and the curriculum folks and all of that to help, you know, weave it together into almost a story fashion so that it makes sense for staff and for students ultimately. So that is absolutely thrilling every day and every week.
Thank you so much to each of you. This has been an absolutely wonderful episode. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.